when the truth is found to be lies, and all the joy within you dies. Don't you want some? Hey, vinyl community, it's Mazzy. And if you've been watching my channel for the last few months, you know that I take pride in my San Francisco heritage. Third generation native San Francisco, born on the very edge of the Haight-Ashbury. Live in Seattle now. Never thought I'd leave, but that's a whole other story. And you know, if you look, there's an earlier video you might want to watch about the sounds of San Francisco and the psychedelic Summer of Love and Beyond and things like that. But today I want to do one on the Jefferson Airplane. They are by far my favorite of the San Francisco bands of the 60s, the psychedelic bands. Obviously that included the Grateful Dead, Moby Grape, Quicksilver Messenger Service, Santana, Steve Miller Band on the East Bay, Creedence Clearwater, and Conjo and the Fish, and on and on and on. Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company. But the Jefferson Airplane loves you. And the Jefferson Airplane doesn't get as much love as they deserve, in my opinion. So I'm going to go through my collection, not definitive. I actually have every record. I don't have every pressing of everything. I'm not going to get into the Jefferson Starship, but I will mention one project overlapping in that, because that's a whole different band, and you youngsters are more into that glitzy pop, Muzaki Starship sound. But all I'll say is good for them. They made a shitload of money. Grace, Marty, and Paul Kanner obviously made some Starship boucoups of bucks. And then, of course, there's Hot Tuna with Yorma and Jack Cassidy. So I'm not getting into that. That's a whole different thing. But I'm going to go through them quickly, fairly quickly. Obviously, their first record was Jefferson Airplane Takes Off. That's when Signe Anderson was their lead singer before Grace joined. 1966, Columbia Records. They were the first band, the first San Francisco band, that the big record companies kind of came down and scooped up. And Columbia obviously signing the Jefferson Airplane. I have two copies, mono and a stereo, and what I don't have, there's a very, very rare mono. The very first pressing of the mono version had an extra 6th track on it, and then they took that off, and it only had 5 tracks on side 1, so I need to find that. I haven't really been looking close for it. I'm sure I can find it on Discogs, but that's something I probably should check out. Also, the first mono pressings had 2 songs with the lyrics were eventually changed. I forgot which song it is, but they talk about lay me down, lay under me or something. And it was sort of a censorship. So on the later stereo version or the later versions, it's different. But they started out pretty much as a folk rock band, not as acidy, but very folk rock. The hit they had on this, or the semi-hit, was Come Up the Years, which is a beautiful, beautiful song. And then did some cover things like Tobacco Road and Get Together, which you all know that Chet Powers wrote. Chet Powers was Dino Valenti, who was a folkster that was also in Quicksilver Messenger Service after the first 2 albums. He started with the band, got busted, went to prison, and then when he got out, he rejoined the Quicksilver Messenger Service. And Get Together, you all know, because of the famous version by the Youngbloods. Obviously, 1967 did it for them with Surrealistic Pillow. They were the breakout band of San Francisco, and that's opened the floodgates, and all the labels came to San Francisco to sign other bands up. Columbia signed Moby Grape, Capitol signed Quicksilver Messenger Service and the Steve Miller Band. Columbia later signed Santana. Fantasy was signing Quicksilver Messenger Service, obviously, and they were a local Bay Area. Fantasy signed Creedence Clearwater Revival. Vanguard Records signed Country Joe and the Fish. The first Big Brother and the Holding Company album was on Mainstream Records, a small label. And then after Clive Davis saw Janis and Big Brother at the Monterey Pop Festival in '67, snatched them away, or at least bought out their contract from mainstream. And we all know about Cheap Thrills, and then pulling Janis out to go solo. But that's another story, another video. This is a Sunday's copy I have, which actually is pretty good. I believe this is a mono copy as well. Yeah, this is a mono copy, so I have a nice, it's a totally different remix. The unfortunate thing about these, for some audiophiles, I still think they're great sounding records, but these records were recorded at RCA Studios in Los Angeles. If you look on the liner notes back here, I think spiritual advisor on this is Jerry Garcia, kind of came to help with their sound. But in those days, as we know from all the major studios, there was a big union thing with engineers and producers, and they didn't really know how to record and get the whole really loud rock and roll psychedelic sound. So unfortunately, the masters, this is drenched in reverb, and we all know that. And unfortunately, they didn't do a dry version and add the reverb later, which would have been a preferable thing in terms of for today's standards. But again, that's the sound of the time, and it's still a great record. It was a huge hit. Obviously, White Rabbit and Somebody to Love were big, big hits. And those are two songs that Grace Slick brought when she joined the group from the Great Society, the band she was in with her brother Darby. And Darby actually wrote Somebody to Love. This came out about 2 years ago. I don't have a lot of 45 RPM MoFis because I don't like the idea of stretching it out and getting up and turning it over after 3 tracks or 4 tracks, depending. 3 tracks in this case. However, with this album, because of the sound, this is a mono MoFi that came out a couple years ago. This by far is the best sounding version I've ever heard of Surrealistic Pillow. So if this is an album that you love and it's a favorite of yours and you want to invest, these go for about $50. You can probably get them as low as 35 to 40 depending the music direct during their sales. But highly recommended. The cover photograph is by Herb Green, a photographer, who actually, he gave me, when I was in San Francisco, I'm a photo agent, so he came over to my office one time, my studio, and we were chatting, and he went to his car and gave me a print. He gave me the famous print of Grace Slick flipping off the camera. And this actually, it was shot in Herb Green's apartment in North Beach in San Francisco. This was on the wall, and you've probably seen a lot of photographs with this background, and some other bands too shot on this, but obviously Surrealistic Pillow is the one. I mean, obviously the huge album. Then they went off and did it. After they had such a hit, they put out what, it's become one of their big cult favorite. A lot of fans love After Bathing at Backers. I love this cover. Again, I have a stereo and mono version, I believe. Oh, this is a Sunday's mono reissue. But let me open up the original gatefold. And it goes less commercial. They had a song, I believe it's Two Heads on here, was sort of one of the main singles, excuse me. But this is such a great record. It grew on me. I remember first getting this after Surrealistic Pillow, and it was unusual to say the least at the time, being 14 years old, whatever I was. Yeah. Anyway, a favorite of mine. I think I have 3 copies. What's the other copy? Oh, this is probably my original stereo. I never got it in mono because 1968 was that period where some records were still coming out in mono, but they were really fully into stereo. So any 1968 mono records by pretty much any group are few and far between, and they're rare. So that's something to check out. But great record, very psychedelic. Come on, let's give some love to the Airplane. One of the best live records ever made, Bless This Pointy Little Head. Jack Cassidy, one of the best bass players in rock and roll. Obviously, those of you who listen to Hot Tuna know his work with Yorma. This is recorded, I believe, at the Fillmore, in Fillmore East probably. And a great sounding record, a great performance. Everyone who likes live 60s rock and roll should get this album. And there's a great version. It's funny, the song Fat Angel was a Donovan song, and it's great hearing them do it because there's a lyric in it, you know, fly, Translove, Airways, get you there on time, fly, Jefferson Airplane, get you there on time, and they do a really great elongated version of that. But pretty amazing record, beautiful cover. I think that's at the Mansion. I was actually born on the edge of the Haight on Stanion Street, just below Fulton. And 2400 Fulton Street, literally around the corner, was what the mansion they bought, 2400 Fulton Street, and they all lived there. And I had an apartment in the late 70s, literally on the block behind it. So during the late 70s, early 80s, when I lived there, I'd hear various forms of them practicing in the studio downstairs, and went to a couple parties there. Cool space. Now it's painted white instead of black. Also in 68, Crown of Creation, two great songs that Grace Slick sort of featured in. Lather, which is a great song she wrote, beautiful ballad, and Triad, which was written by David Crosby, and one of those songs that he wanted to do with the Byrds, but the Byrds weren't having it, about a three-way. And if I have to tell you what kind of three-way, then, you know, you're not old enough to watch this channel. Good record also, really good record. Lather, Triad is on here. Share Little Jokes, amazing. If You Feel, The House at Punio Corners. This is definitely a later cheapo reissue. I need a really good copy of this. I'm out of order here, but this was an OB version, Japanese pressing of Bless This Bone Little Head. So there you go. Okay. Then we go on to 1969 and Morning Maniac music. Again, some say this is their last great record, which I probably agree, but We Can Be Together, Good Shepherd, was a cover, old blues spiritual song, but it has Volunteers and We Can Be Together, the sort of two anthems, and they play them at Woodstock. God, what else is on here? The Farm, beautiful, beautiful record. I just remember when I first got this record opening and loving this. What a great, great photograph by Jim Marshall. You know, I've talked about Jim Marshall before. He did the album. This is very protesting. Some people didn't like that they got so political, and some people get turned off by that type of thing. Give me a fucking break. I love Phil Oakes, love John Lennon. I love, you know, when an artist takes a stand. Obviously, looking back on it 50 years on, you might say it's dated, but this is an amazing record. Again, I would agree, probably their last great record, but the first records I showed you up until now, those are the ones, if you're into psychedelic and that thing, you need to get. They were a great band. Think about it. They had two amazing, stunning singers with Marty Ballin and Grace Slick. Then they had Paul Kantner, who was a great singer, you know, maybe the second tier vocal-wise, and Jorma Kaukonen, you know, who sang all the stuff with Hot Tuna and with them too. So they really had a lot to spread out and a lot of artists in the group. And they're drumming up at this point, Spencer Dryden, who later joined the New Riders of the Purple Sage. They kicked him out of the group, and, you know, I don't remember all the details, the politics, you know. I think, in fact, I think Marty, and I don't want to get like all sexual here, I think Marty is the only one that Grace hadn't had, like, got involved with sexually during their heyday and stuff. So, sorry to Marty Ballin. But, you know, on into the Starship and the different solo projects beyond that, it was up and down and hit and miss and quitting and getting back together and reunion. And they did do a reunion record for Columbia Records, was it the late 70s or 80s? I forgot. Terrible record. Very slick LA sound. Terrible record. And I'm not going to even talk about Starship and We Built This City and all that crap, but, you know, there are a few good things in the beginning of that. Okay. Bark. This is my original copy of Jefferson Airplane Bark. Their drummer was Joey Covington by this time. This is my original copy. It came in a... They started their own record label by this point, Grunt Records, which was an imprint of RCA. And a lot of solo projects. There was a Grace Slick solo. There was the Blows Against the Empire, which I said the only Starship project I would mention. It wasn't an official Starship record, but it was Paul Kantner's solo project with Grace Slick and with, I mean, David Crosby's on it, and all the Airplane, I believe, or maybe except for Marty, is on it, as is David Crosby, maybe Neil Young. I'm thinking out, maybe not. He was on later stuff, but just a great time when they were recording at Wally Hyder's and did a lot of real tight San Francisco scene then, and some of the LA people, again, like David Crosby. But Bark came in this bag. Again, mine's intact. And there you go. Wrapped fish. And then there's an insert. And there's a couple of amazing songs. First of all, When the Earth Moves Again is on here, which is great. Funk and Pretty As You Feel are Joey Covington songs that are just stunning. They don't have the Airplane sound. It was a whole new sound for them, but they're worth checking out. But I'd say the highlight of this whole album that holds up today with the whole indie folk thing is Third Week in Chelsea, sung by Yorma. And what you should do, what's great about this actually, on this record, it's harmonized by Grace. There's a great version, maybe from about 15 or 20 years ago, live version where Grace showed up at a Yorma show, and they do it together. But Third Week in Chelsea, stunningly beautiful piece of folk music and guitar. I didn't even mention back on, you know, the song that we all love, the guitar playing, that really kind of freaked us out, or just we all loved back, was Embryonic Journey by Yorma on the Surrealistic Pillow album. So there you go. Again, Jefferson Airplane loves you, baby. Then we get into some complicated work. My original copy of Long John Silver. You know, there's a song called Easter, Eat Starch Mama. You know, some okay things on this, not great. I think the best part of this, and I never made mine, but I had friends that did in college. This was a college record for me. But if you pull this out, you could fold it up and make it into a stash box to hold your pot. But mine is pristine. Here's the instructions how to fold it. You know, Grunt Records, I wonder how much money RC actually lost on Grunt Records. I don't know if there are any hits. Then we get into 30 Seconds Over Winterland, a live record. Probably it's a 73 or 4, 73. I was at one of these shows because I saw the Airplane first in late 68, I believe, and 69. That was their highlight. Obviously, if you saw them early, you know, before 69, 67, 68, at the Fillmore Winterland was the place to see him. And my friend Coleman saw him, I think, a number of times. It was his favorite band, too. And that was one of our early connections to become friends. This is the period where they had Papa John Creech, who also played with Hot Tuna for a while and played with the Airplane during these records. Not a big fan. You can take them in small doses. You know, the running joke is Papa John's screech, because you had that screeching violin player. But I saw them several times around this period, and I actually went to a party they had for this record at the 2400 Fulton Street mansion, and they actually gave out Grunt comic book. I think this came in the record. I can't remember if this came. Oh, this was a promo thing, so I can't remember if this came in the record or if I got this. I worked in record stores at this time. It was a promo piece for Grunt Records. Maybe this came in at our store and I just put it in here. If anyone has one of these, let me know, because I don't recall. I don't think it came in the album. But they had a party there and they gave out 30-second Over Winterland tank top t-shirts. And in the 90s, I believe, there was a lawsuit, because remember the screensavers with the toasters? Well, Bill Thompson, who was the manager of the Jefferson Airplane and the Jefferson Airplane and Grunt Records, sued the company, I'm blanking on the company's name, that did the toasters. I think they did not succeed in their lawsuit, but they were talking about copyright infringement because they started this flying toaster thing. And then those flying toasters, if you remember, those of you who had computers in the late 90s and the early internet days, remember those screensavers on your computer, the flying toasters. It was like one of the first big cooler 3D type of screensavers. Winterland, great stuff. Then a great record. I mean, for a collection, if you want to be introduced, is the worst of the Jefferson Airplane, which essentially was their first greatest hits record. There's Nipper, RCA EMI icon, his master's voice. And this has the usual hits. It's No Secret, Blues from Airplane, Somebody to Love Today, White Rabbit, Embryonic Journey, on and on and on. Lather's on here, Good Shepherd. Anyway, 30 Seconds Over Winterland. And then, an album I particularly like, 1966 to 1976, a 10-year flight log. And this was essentially sort of a best of, and a 2-record set, but also includes some of the best of their Grunt Records solo material. So in addition to some of their great hits, it had something from Sunfighter, which was a Paul Kantner Grace Slick solo album. Had Burgers, Keep on Truckin', Jada, Keep on Truckin' from Hot Tuna. It had Have You Seen the Saucers from Blows Against the Empire, the Paul Kantner first Starship project. Manhole, which was the great title of the first Grace Slick solo album, which has some interesting things. Baron von Tolbooth and the Chrome Nun, another bizarre, kind of strange album with by Kantner and Slick. Again, all those albums have 2 or 3 gems. Qua, which was a really good solo album by Yorma that I think came out on Record Store Day, a reissue of it several years ago. But Qua, Quah. If you like guitar playing and like Hot Tuna and that, Qua is something you need. Dragonfly, which was the first real Jefferson Starship album, which is pretty good. And there's some live stuff on here too. And then lastly, this was a promo. Oh, these go together. Okay. This, if any of you don't know, 2400 Fulton Street is yet another best of, but this is one of the best sounding mastering of any Jefferson Airplane. So I think if you don't want anything else, I think you need Surrealistic Pillow and some of the other albums and Volunteers, and Baxter's, but if you just want one, find this. And on vinyl, it's around, but this is that sort of crossover period where people were buying CDs. So, you could probably, if you find this, it's probably not played a lot, only because I think people started getting CDs. So if they bought this, they put it aside and played their CDs. That's the Airplane Mansion, 2400 Fulton Street. I happen to know there's a art director, graphic designer, ad guy that bought this from the Airplane, I think 25 years ago. Him and his wife's an interior designer, and they bought the building from them. So I've been in it since once, but it is painted white now. And again, this is overlooking Golden Gate Park. So if you're in San Francisco, you can walk here and walk down to Haight Street and go to Amoeba Music and buy records. But this is a great, great collection. 2-record set. The CD version has, I think, 1 or 2 more tracks, plus the CD version has their commercials they did for Levi Strauss jeans, audio commercial, which are just very psychedelic, kind of cool. But really good sounding record. And this was a promo I got. I think it was a promo, or did they sell it? Oh, promo sampler, yeah. This is a White Rabbit, Wooden Ship, Somebody to Love. Oh, plus the Levi commercials pressed on white vinyl. And these were put out in 1987. So this is a white version. It has those tracks that were left off the vinyl, but were on the CD 2 CD set. So anyway, the Jefferson Airplane loves you, and I love the Jefferson Airplane, so you need to get on board. Fly Jefferson Airplane. Mazzy out, subscribe, make comments, get into the San Francisco scene. You know, let's get them back again. Not back in terms of back, but, you know, let's love the Jefferson Airplane. Bye, everyone. Thanks for watching.